This is a tutorial on the Accounts Receivable New Record Entry screen. The New Record Entry screen can be used to enter outstanding accounts receivable records when the system is first being set up. If you're migrating from another system and you have outstanding accounts receivable, this is the screen you can use to set up your data. In the absence of the order entry module, this accounts receivable entry screen can also be used to enter your invoices and credit notes into the system for use in the accounts receivable module. If you're using the Dynamic 3i order entry module, but you have some minor adjustments to make that you don't wish to process through the order entry cycle, for example, if you have a credit and you're not going to physically issue a credit note, or perhaps a small invoice, you may want to use this screen to enter these type of transactions for processing. Once data is entered into this screen, the system will automatically update the general ledger in real time. So immediately you could use this particular invoice to make adjustments, write-offs, transfers, or you could make a payment against the invoice. We're going to enter an invoice. So we'll start with the screen in the entry mode, enter our customer number and a corresponding invoice number. At this point, we can select from the list of values and select a credit, unapplied cash, or an invoice. Most likely in the screen you're going to be entering an invoice or a credit. Unapplied cash records are created during the cash application section of this module. You may want to enter an unapplied cash records in here if you're setting up the system for the first time, but logically it wouldn't make sense if you're using the accounts receivable module in the proper manner that you'd ever set up an unapplied cash record here. So we're going to select an invoice type from the list here, and we'll enter our invoice amount. It's going to be in our branch number 1. If we have an amount that we're not going to discount, we would enter that value in here. And here's our outstanding amount. If you're using this screen to enter data in from another system when you're migrating to Dynamic 2000, you can't not change the outstanding amount field. So if you had an invoice that was partially paid, you'd have to enter the partially unpaid amount in this screen rather than entering, for example, if you had a $200 invoice but there was only 50 remaining, you couldn't enter a 50 here. You would have to just enter your invoice for $50. We'll just cursor our way through this screen. Salesperson could be changed if there was a reference that defaults from the customer master. Next we see the transaction date. Here we're going to enter the invoice date. The system will default to today's date, and you can enter any accounting period that's open for this transaction date. We get a pop-up box here, and we can enter the ship to customer. If it was different from the bill to customer, this is just for reference purposes only. Any corresponding customer purchase order number, we're going to just randomly enter a series of numbers and letters. If this was in dispute, you could check the dispute flag here. This dispute flag shows up in AR 1100, which is our main inquiry screen for the AR module, and it also shows up on the open items report, so you can determine whether the invoice or credit is in particular dispute by looking at that report in that inquiry screen. You can enter a reference number in here if you wish. Here are the terms. It defaults from the customer master table. And And again, that can be changed if you wish. If you have a reference to a sales order number, that can be entered at this point. Various places in the application, if you're using the order entry module and invoices are created, the sales order number will get populated in this field, and you'll be able to see this field in various parts of the application. This is a system generated source here, which is accounts receivable. If an invoice was generated through the order entry cycle, our accounts receivable source for that would be order entry. The next field is not mandatory, it's just for informational purposes, and you can check this adjustment field if this is pertaining to an adjustment to the customer's account, or just leave it unchecked if it's not an adjustment. You'll only find this referenced in the AR inquiry screen, AR 1100. You can enter any minor type of explanation that you wish at this point, but we do have a comments button here that will allow you to enter a more detailed comment that you'd be able to see in the AR inquiry screen. So we'll put a comment in there. Now in this case here we have a foreign currency, which is a US currency, because we're running the application right now in a Canadian branch. So once we come down to the account number field and we hit enter, the exchange will automatically be populated in here, calculated against this particular invoice. If we went into the currency file maintenance, we'd be able to see the exchange rate, and under the and from there we can see how the exchange was calculated. So that's an automatic GL entry onto this transaction. Next we can go in here and enter in our corresponding account for the opposite side of the transaction. So we're going to do a list of values at this point, and just quickly select from the list of values an account. Okay, we'll take freight. Hit enter. And at this point, the system will do the calculation for us by just hitting enter. We didn't have to enter that ourselves, but if we wanted to continue to enter some GL accounts, we're able to at this point. At this point, we're going to save the transaction. So now what we have done in real time is created GL transactions for this particular invoice, debiting our accounts receivable account and crediting and debiting the distribution found at the bottom of the screen here that we've entered. We're ready now to process this invoice. If you ever have an invoice though that you've entered into the system, into the screen, and you'd like to delete it, perhaps you've made an error, you would just simply go into this screen, query up the particular invoice, and do a delete record on that. I'm going to query upon a previous invoice that I've entered, and we'll walk through that. So we'll go into query mode. I'll enter my invoice number, execute query, and if I click up here on the delete record field, and then do a save, I've now deleted the invoice, and so this reverses out the original GL transactions that occurred. This concludes the tutorial on the accounts receivable new record entry.